Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more. Saturdays with Renee.
All right. What's up, world? Welcome back to another episode of Saturdays with Renee, episode 45, a special edition featuring 2 Black. Renee, what's going on? 2 Black, what's going on? Welcome. Episode 45.
Thank you. Thank you for volunteering to join 2 Black. Appreciate you.
No problem.
Out. Yeah. Anyway.
So,
shout out to everybody in the remixer community. And just quickly, we are not live. This is a pre-record. I was about
to say, do the warning so we don't get yelled at.
I want to get people upset.
I know. They be mad when we're not live too. they be upset. What you mean it's not live? But
we only exist to provide space for the chat. That's so
that's it. And it's once again Jared's fault that we're not live. So as long as every time we pre-record is on Jared, I can.
I think the better villain, almost one that some prefer, is Diallo's fault, really, because he made Eli down to Jackson to be part of this album release party for Skip Coon, which people will hear about and get to see. I intend to bring some footage back, so looking forward to that. And but we're also missing, because we talked about it, that great book party for Mumia that's happening.
Yes.
What would be today, tonight up in Harlem.
Right.
So I'll be in Jackson, so serendipity has it though that we get to have this conversation with 2 Black in the context of Black August. And so I think I would hope people would forgive this.
I'm sure they will. Yeah. I feel like the fact that 2 Black is here is going to be we get an automatic like boost on whatever, because it's always. My mother is a big fan 2 Black, just so you know.
Oh, that's good to hear. We'll see.
She yells at me every week. Why are you always bringing me up? Because you're my mama. I don't know. I got nothing. So it is Black August, as everyone hopefully is aware by now. We've been doing a lot of programming surrounding Black August on the channel and the platform. And 2 Black sent me a note and he was like, can we do something? And I didn't even ask Jared. I was like, yes. And then I text Jared. I was like, oh, by the way, 2 Black is coming. So do you want to just let everybody know like kind of what the thought was when you sent the email, and then we can go from there?
Yeah, first I apologize because I randomly out of nowhere got hit with, I don't know if it's a cold, but some kind of sinus like last night while I was working. So I sound a little congested. My apologies. Yeah, I mean, as some people know, I've been an advocate of the Pendleton 2. There's 2 political prisoners, Christopher Naeem Trotter and John Balagoon Cole, here in Indiana, who have been in prison for over 40 years and received a sentence for over 200 plus years for intervening to save a human life. A fellow prisoner by the name of Lincoln Love was being beaten by the guards. We can go over the timeline later, but I'm just giving a kind of synopsis. He was being beaten by the guards in 1985 at the time was called Indiana State Reformatory, what we now call Pendleton Correctional Facility. When they intervened to save his life, they was a prison takeover, and for about 15 hours, they were sent to trial. It was all white jury, and they received 200 plus years, even though they were able to save his life. No one died in this incident. but they still got de facto life sentences for it. So I've been advocating for them as a part of a broader defense committee. So it's not just me. I was a co-director of a film, The Pendleton 2, They Stood Up, that I believe, I can't remember the exact site, but I know Renee had an event last year, a live event to display that film, and we've shown it around the country. Many people on this channel may have seen it, but I know everybody hasn't. So, and things can get lost in people's mind because there's all kinds of nonsense going on in the world. So always want to take a chance to uplift it again. So I thought Black August was a good time to do it. The focus right now is really on the legal defense fund. So I wanted to push people, the links and everything will be in the show notes, to really go to the defense fund and donate whatever you can. Anything helps. We're really trying to tighten things up on that side. Dr. Ball we probably should have played that video, but he was fortunate enough to do a video on IG that is asking for people to donate and gives a bit of background on their case. And then if there are any lawyers or people who know lawyers exist that would want to help on this case, also sending out a call for recruitment on that level, because we could definitely need more legal support. So we'll definitely want to send out a call for that. It's not that they don't have any, but we could definitely use more. So if you have a focus in sentence modifications, post-conviction relief, wrongfully convicted, anything of that nature, federal habeas corpus, I'm just throwing out legal terms. If you have any experience in that or know anyone who has any experience in that, please reach out. So we're doing like a set of events next week for the Pendleton 2 Defense Committee for Black August. So there's going to be a book talk with the book I was on here previously, talk about Laundering Black Rage. That might not sound related, but basically we're doing a book talk where then all the proceeds go to the campaign. So, I don't make any money off that. Rasul doesn't make any money off that. And then we're going to do an art event for the comic display of the Pendleton 2, and then we're going to do a rally. And then we're a part of a film festival locally, the Indianapolis Black Film Festival. And we'll be screening that on the 25th. So again, all that will be in the chat for those who are either local to Indianapolis or at least close enough to maybe come for one of these events. So that's just a general rundown of what we're doing. We can get deep into the timeline and what was going on in Pendleton and all of that, but I just want to give people kind of a backdrop.
No, thank you very much. Just quickly, and we don't have to play it. But people should go to the Instagram page and get caught up with what the Pendleton 2 case is and the current call for support. And then they can see the video that I did there. And in that context, I think it would be cool. I don't need to sit and watch myself again. But there's so much good content here about the case and about the work. So people should tap in, and then of course they can follow the links up here to get more information and to support financially. Because I know you didn't mention it here specifically, but these things can get expensive. Lawyers, time. I mean, it's not easy to do all of this. And when you're dealing with political prisoners who haven't received as much attention as others who deserve that attention, it can be that much more difficult. So we would encourage to check that out and support.
And I do want you to go in. Can you do the timeline first and explain the background story for the Pendleton 2? And like Two Black said, I do think people should watch the documentary. We did a screening in Jersey that was relatively well attended, given that we just kind of were like, we're going to show this documentary and who wants to come out and see it. But there's a lot to this story that I think if people just look at it on the surface and they just hear like the numbers, they don't understand how much more was going on behind the scenes in Pendleton, what that place was like, what the correction officers were actually up to, and all of that comes with the documentary. But if you could give that rundown on the timeline, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, no problem. something else I forgot to mention earlier in my little introduction was we found out that the guards were part of the Klan. Don't want to bury that part. So we'll get more into that. Uh, so yeah, I think the way we try to explain this to give people a little bit of sense of what Pendleton was even prior to the uprising, so people don't think of this as just some random occurrence like that black people would just get mad out of nowhere and do things, which is one of the many myths that we always have to fight against, is that they're whenever you read the reports from the state, it's almost as if people were never really justified, or even if they understand that people were mad, this was not the right course of action, blah blah blah, whatever. So Pendleton, it was built in 1923. It had went through different iterations to kind of like move up the timeline. In 1969, just give you a sense of just how racist this place was. About 100 prisoners, black prisoners, did a sit down in the yard because of the way that black prisoners were being treated. There was no violence. They literally was just a sit down, it was just like, we're not going into our cells. We're going to sit in the yard to protest the way we're being treated. And it was a silent sit down. And then the guards fired rounds into the crowd of about 100 black men who were sitting peacefully in the yard, killing one person actually and wounding 47 people. Just fired into a crowd of people that were just sitting peacefully. So for those who will hear the rest of this story, and we'll say, why didn't they just do it peacefully? This is the kind of stuff as to why they didn't do it peacefully. There was a class action lawsuit under the name French versus Owen that it came out in 85, but it dealt with the conditions prior to 85. It said by 1982, the Pendleton Reformatory housed about 2,000 prisoners. That's always over twice its intended capacity. So this is an overcrowded prison. So a prison that's supposed to house 1,000 is now housing 2,000. To accommodate the rise in population, prison officials placed two prisoners in cells that were intended for one. So one person's cells became stacked with two persons or two people. More than 1/3 of all cells were converted to double cells. By 1982, the gross available man per cell in the double cells was 24 square feet. That's how big the cells were. Net approximate is half of that when you add beds and toilets. So about 12 square feet. You have two men stuck at the 12 square feet. In segregation, it says prisoners were kept who needed to be separated from general population. That's segregation. The ceilings were lower, and inmates on the top bunks of double beds were unable to sit up. So the ceiling was so low that people could not sit up, and folks ended up having back problems because there was folks that couldn't even fully stand up in their cell, particularly if they were on the top bunk. So that's the kind of world we're in. And then just to give you some other stuff, the kitchen, commissary, food shortages areas were unsanitary and infested with mice and roaches. Right, so this is the food they're eating. The floor was found uncleanable due to holes, cracks, crevices, missing tile, and gross porosity. Some of the ceilings were missing. Pots and pans were covered with uncleanable grim. So this is just the conditions that they're living under, let alone the racism where people were regularly, like black prisoners were regularly beat, regularly targeted, to the point that they did form an organization. The Pendleton Two and others within this network formed an organization called the Black Dragons, which is a self-defense organization and a mutual aid organization that looked out for each other, that gave people care packages, that taught, that had political education classes, that taught self-defense. And the goal was to unify all prisoners, primarily black, but all prisoners, from fighting each other, because they understood they were up against these racist guards in this very unsanitary, dilapidated prison, right? Like this is the situation. So that's a bit of a backdrop for people before we even get to the actual incident or the uprising that occurs. Is that this is the place that they lived in daily. Rats, mice, small, dilapidated cells, cramped in cells that were not even meant for two people. Couldn't get cleaning supplies. Often would have to do little kind of uprisings or I guess actions just to get soap and things of that nature. And I think we take these things for granted because, again, most of us out here that are not living in severe poverty usually can obtain soap. We usually can obtain basic things, and we're always trying to run from places that you can't get soap, or that if you hear the food's got, there's rats or roaches in the house, most of us don't want to live in these places, right? Like, this is not something, even if you have had to live in those places, like, you're trying to get out of that. But in this case, there's no real way to get out because you're in prison. Until you're let out of prison, you can't escape. And then on top of that, you're getting beat, you're getting targeted, you're getting harassed, right? Just for being Black. So this is all happening. So of course, somebody's probably gonna respond, in some form of resistance or self-defense. This isn't. Sometimes people couch these things as spontaneous, and I always say that there's things that are not planned. Like Ori's work, Ori Sami Burton really talks about this, like this spontaneity problem that people often infuse into these stories. Like, one, these are organized prisoners. Like I said, they were in an organization that was unified. Two, even when things are not planned, they're not necessarily spontaneous in the sense that they come out of nowhere or thin air, right? Like, people are prepared for moments that they may not be planning, but they are prepared for things to pop off. So what I'm about to describe was not planned in the sense that they wanted it to go this way, but these are people who were trained to respond, and they had a certain camaraderie amongst each other that didn't allow for them to just accept anything, right? So we need to understand it in that sense, not just this kind of sporadic, one day we woke up type of thing, So again, on February 1st, 1985, this is when the actual uprising occurs, and they're in the MRU, what's called the Maximum Restraint Unit, and there's a prisoner by the name of Lincoln Love, who was a jailhouse lawyer, who had helped many of the people in the prison get out of prison. He was, he was a feisty prisoner in the sense that he would stand up for himself. He would argue with the guards, and he would defend people's rights all the time. And, he was put in the MRU, and the guards had already been messing with him. There had been a bit of a back and forth. The main guard who was over that unit stated in the documentary wasn't present that day. He just wasn't at work. And it was said that guard usually had a pretty good control of that unit. Things were as fair as they could be in the MRU in the whole, effectively. But he didn't come to work this day. So all of a sudden, there's these guards who they start searching the cells. They're flipping beds and all of this, and they do it multiple times. And it's clear that they're targeting Lincoln Love's cell, but Lincoln Love wouldn't come out. So they, all this is in the film, but they line up, outside his door, and they got shields and billy clubs and, everything ready to do business. And they tell him to come out of the cell, and then they march into his cell, and this is the lawsuit at the time, says they maliciously held him down and unmercifully stomped and kicked the inmate all over his body, and hit the inmate upon and about his upper head and his upper body and head with nightsticks. And we even read other things where the guards actually stood up on the bed because there wasn't enough space for all the guards in there to beat him up. This is after, and they are beating him from the bed. They put tear gas in the cell, and he was handcuffed while all this was happening, so he was not even able to defend himself. Those billy clubs were actually considered illegal at the time, so none of this was, above board for even their own corrupt laws. So as this is occurring, the prisoners that are watching in the MRU start shouting like, "Hey, they trying to kill us down here," because they thought he was dead. This was not a sense of he's just getting a few poundings. Like, they thought they were going to kill him or he was already dying. So they're yelling to people, yo, like, come get us, come save us, because they're trying to kill us down here. So they're yelling from the MRU down to what is like called the general population. They had seen that Lincoln Love was actually dragged by his head as they were walking the guards dragged him by his head as they were walking out of the cell. And they said and one of the other prisoners who was watching, Big R, said that, he said, "Well, you're next." That's what they said to him. So as they're yelling down, like, "Hey, they trying to kill us down here." This is where John Balagoon Cole comes in. You know, I can't remember the term, but he was a lay advocate. That's what it was called. He's a lay advocate, and so he would often, these lay advocates are people who would advocate for the release of other prisoners, etc. And so he was intending to go up there, and the guards told him he couldn't go up to this MRU, but he hears these calls, so he about Lincoln Love, and Lincoln Love is one of his friends. Lincoln Love is considered his brother, so he goes to check out what's happening, and then, he's turned away. He goes to what's called the captain's office, and he said there was this curtain that they would pull, and this curtain effectively symbolized that they were beating somebody when they pulled this curtain. So he goes back to the main area and talks to other prisoners, and this is where Christopher Naim Trotter gets involved, and several others come with him, and they go as a group to the captain's office to try to figure out what is happening to Lincoln Love, because as we found out in a deposition by a guard that he said, quote, when they were referred to Lincoln Love, that he heard the order was to, quote, kill the son of a bitch. That was the actual order that was given, right? So they don't know everything, but they obviously know the kind of prison they're in. Again, we've laid out the conditions, and they know what kind of guards they're dealing with. So they rushed peacefully initially to see what's happening in to Lincoln Love at this captain's office, and they were pushed away. They tried to push through to see what was happening. Then they were attacked by the guards, and then this is when the fight begins. This is when the actual violence begins. So they started to defend themselves, but they didn't initiate it. They were attacked. They fought, and then at this point, now they're fighting guards, but now more guards are swarming because it's on the call, like, there's prisoner uprising, and Lincoln Love had been moved to the infirmary. So now Naim Balagoon followed, but as they were trying to get to the infirmary, they encountered more guards, and then they fought their way out of the infirmary, and then they were forced into what's called the guard hall. And at this point, they're fighting to save their lives, and now they're being like corralled and surrounded by guards. So now guards are attacking them with sticks, with mace, all this, trying to run up on them. There was a guard that was supposed to shoot them. It's disputed whether or not that guard refused to do it. They're being chased by trucks and all of this. So eventually, to get out of this situation, Naim takes one of the guards hostage, because Balagoon's about to get swarmed, and then they run into what's called Cell House J, and they take over this cell house where there's other prisoners to push themselves off from the guards, and to survive, because now they're hearing the orders to kill them. So that now they're in fear for their own lives, not just Lincoln Love's life. They take over this cell house for about 16 hours. And what they do is they take the hostages and they actually put them in a cell and protect them, because a lot of the prison population understandably wanted to kill them. And I have no judgment there. But they understood that if that happened, we're in Black August thinking about Attica, and we know how they shot into the yard and indiscriminately was willing to even kill guards, right, in Attica. It was not just about the prisoners. They shot through guards to kill prisoners. So they're aware of this history, so they're like, we can't have anybody die here, So no one. That's what I'm saying. No one died, and they actually went out of their way to protect them, despite electricity being cut and things of that nature. And they're in there for about 16 hours. So they had a series of demands that they actually wrote up to negotiate this standoff to improve the prisons for their own means, and it was to end censorship of letters and media, the ability to be politically active without reprisal, the establishment of a minimum wage for inmates, the establishment of grievance committee for prisoners to safely bring forward rewards to the DOC without fear of intimidation and threats, beatings, or any punishments from guards. Also important to know, I forgot to say, they have called the media by this point. They actually called the local Black media, WTLC at the time, 106, what is it? I always get that wrong. I think it's 106.7, but sorry, my Indianapolis folks, so I got that wrong. But this was a popular station at the time. Indianapolis Recorder, a black newspaper, was called, and that was actually one of the negotiators. And then the Indianapolis Star, and I believe another media rep was called in. All of these people came in to be negotiators for these demands between the prison and the prisoners themselves. This was, even though this story is not really told anymore, this was a big story at the time. It made it to the New York Times. It was in all the local newspapers. There was a lot of press about it at the time, but it's just faded out of memory. Actually, the once this was over, after about 16, 17 hours, the numbers are always a little varied depending on which article you read. They get their demands agreed to, and one of the demands was there would be no reprisals, which clearly that didn't occur. And the media, because it's actually in a Indianapolis Recorder article, I believe, or the media walked back with them to their cell to make sure that nothing happened to them, that they weren't roughed up on their way there. And then, from there, they were, this is where the repression actually gets worse for them. Now, it is important to note that Lincoln Love survived, and I do think he wouldn't have survived that day had they not had to redirect all the attention to them, because they would have just kept welling on him. And then they would have came up with an excuse that he resisted or whatever, and he would have just died. So they saved his life by taking that attention off him. And, and they really saved the life of guards, not out of just because they love guards, but they're really looking out for the life of prisoners and understanding what could happen to them. So again, no one died in this incident. The violence that occurred from our perspective and from the perspective of Pendleton too was self-defense, because there's a legal term like seeking defense, like looking to defend the harm of a third person, and that was their state of mind when they went. They were looking to defend the harm of a third person. But the courts didn't see it that way. So after this in '85, they were left in the whole time. They were in segregation the entire time. Many of them had been shipped in different places, but Naim and Balagoon were considered the leaders of this revolt. So when they went to trial, it was an all-white jury. There was a good percentage of Black people in this county. This is Madison County, Indiana. The biggest city is Anderson, but this Pendleton is in Madison County, Indiana. It was the Black jurors who were in the pool were rejected on petty things like having ticket fines and shit like that. So they didn't make it. It was an all-white jury. It's believed that some of those jurors were actually from the counties that these guards, or from the cities that these guards worked in, and they even knew some of these guards. Ultimately, they were not able to get any of the evidence that would have proved that this was a self-defense case into the court, or the evidence was not submitted, because anytime that their lawyers tried to submit it, they were blocked by the judge and the prosecutor. They said the prosecutor was fraternizing with the jury. That means that, in layman terms, that means that they were talking with them and chatting with them, and you're not supposed to do that. Ultimately they were unable to, put a defense up that helped them. And this is where the Ku Klux Klan part comes in, because this was confessed to by a guard that worked there. So this is not something that's hearsay from the prisoners. Not that would mean anything less, but a guard by the name of Michael Richardson confessed that there was a group in the prison called the Sons of Light. I have the transcripts here. He says, "Are you aware of any?" This is the lawyer asking him, "Are you aware of any racially motivated groups of any groups that the guards belong to?" He says, "Yes, the Sons of Light." And the lawyer says, "And what do you know about them?" He says, quote, "It's a group of lieutenants, captains, sergeants that belong to that use the KKK literature and some of the same rituals. They are a splinter group. They're not affiliated. That means that they are their own independent cell within the prison. They're not like part of a broader chapter. They don't pay dues. It's developed solely for the institution." And they said, what's their purpose? He said, well, they hate niggers, they hate Jews, and they hate Catholics. And that's how it was explained to me. And then he talks about Lieutenant Burke. I always like to name some of these people's names. He says Lieutenant Burke is a reverend within the Ku Klux Klan. He said a reverend who tries, he'll talk to you about joining the Klan. He said, then he had somebody like Captain Sands. He said, our children used to be babysitted by his and played with his Klan robe. So the children play with the Klan robe. He carries a card. He's involved in it. That's the caption. That's the captain, which is all over the captains of the institution. And then you have Captain Jackson, which is involved in the Boga film. And the Boga film apparently is a film that they, like basically a snuff film of them beating up prisoners that they passed around. So they were doing this before even cell phones or anything of that nature. So this is a deposition that's held prior to the trial. But even though Michael Richardson was cross-examined for the trial itself, he testified in the trial. This information never made it before the trial. That guards were in the Klan. So to kind of close this out, and I'll take more questions. They ultimately receive over 200 plus years. John Balakoon Cole gets 84 years. 80 of those years are for what's called criminal confinement. And instead of running those things, instead of combining those sentences into just 20 years, they run consecutively, and it's 20 years, 4 times. And that's how he gets 80 years. And then I believe it was rioting and bodily harm was the other one. That's how you get 84 years. So quite simply, he should be out of prison, even if you think he was wrong, if they had just hit him with 1 count, but they hit him with 4 counts. Naeem gets those 4 counts, plus an attempted murder charge, plus bodily harm. And I can't remember the last charge. And that all adds up to 142 years because they claim that he shouldn't have violently he had stabbed somebody, I think, right around the shoulder or something like that. I can't remember the exact area. And they said that was excessive. So they hit him with an attempted murder charge. And it's weird, even when you read like the newspaper articles, when they talk to the jurors, they will actually admit, there's a juror who admitted that they thought the beating of Lincoln Love was wrong and they thought that they were justified in intervening. But they think once it got to the infirmary, things went too far. And that's why they gave them this charge. So even though they admit that, they were justified, they say, well, they went too far. So they get a life sentence. I don't, but whatever. So this was, so in 1987, they're convicted of these charges, and they've been in prison since then, and they've been in solitary confinement, which we can get into later. Balagoon spent 32 years in solitary confinement. Naeem spent 20 years in solitary confinement. It's not, solitary confinement isn't even good for a few weeks. It's considered, inhumane. But they spent in the SHU and in the Supermax prison in Westville. They had to, ride in there. They went on hunger strikes to shut down these prisons. This is all documented in the film. They weren't always successful shutting them down. They were able to shut down certain units, but then they were transferred to other units. They're both back in population now, and they're actually still decent. Especially their mental faculties are still there. They still are sharp. Obviously, due to the way prisons work, their health is always deteriorating because prisons don't really take care of people. But they're still alive. They're still pushing, and they still want to go home. So again, that's the overall layout of the case. I know that was kind of long, but just to give y'all a kind of thorough breakdown. So I'll stop there.
No, I'm glad, because for people who haven't seen the documentary, a lot of this information, and even if you have, because I think I've now seen it like 3 times, and I still feel like I just learned something from you that I didn't know in watching it those 3 times and from reading what I did. Can you just very quickly, only because I've had, in prepping for the screening that I did, as you know, Leon Bentley joined us, who had also spent some time at Pendleton. He was falsely convicted. I think he did 30 years, if I remember correctly, before he was finally released. But he talked a lot about the shoe, and you threw it out. I had it actually written down as you were talking to ask you about it, and then you said it. But I know probably a lot of people might not be familiar with what the shoe is. So can you just explain what the shoe is?
Yeah, it's Leon Benson, just to so people are clear.
Sure is my fault, Leon. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Yeah, the shoe. This is where I'm currently working on a piece with the committee. We're co-writing a piece to try to also explain. We're using Ori's work I'll get to. This is probably for a later part of the conversation to kind of connect this to a broader part of counterinsurgency. But we're working on the piece. And so I've been going over that stuff again. And there was, because of the kind of conditions that I described at the beginning, there was several uprisings, not just at Pendleton and Michigan City. There was another one in Pendleton like a year after the one I just described, and that one people did die. So there was a prisoner movement beyond just uprisings that was going on. There was, like I said, there was these poly-ed classes and all these things that they were running prisons basically themselves. They were rehabilitating themselves. And there was a broader prisoner movement. So in the early 90s, Indiana starts building what's called supermax prisons, where people are in lockdown for 24 hours a day, where they have windowless cells, where they're not really allowed any human connection. And when they are brought out of a cell, they're basically on they're chained the entire time, and they're on a leash, like they're held on a dog leash by the prisoner, and they'll let them go into a room to stretch and move for about an hour, and then they're sent back into their cell to rot away. Balagoon talks about how they would have to play chess by yelling out of the cell and yelling if people who've played chess, if it's like A1, C5, A1 to C5, or whatever, like they would have to yell the actual board numbers to tell the other member where the piece would move, because they could not see each other. They had to just yell it out. If you had a chessboard in your room, you moved the piece. Then there was all kinds of torture that went on in both of these units. Honestly, there was a Supermax in Westville, Indiana, and then there's the SHU units. SHU stands for Security Housing Units, and from what I've understood, those were honestly probably worse than even the Supermax. But the Supermax were built for these supposedly super violent criminals who could not work within the regular population, were considered malcontents, and they use this label to take some of the most revolutionary and progressive prisoners and send them to these units. Once they got in these units, they would have to go, like I said, in Westville, they actually went on a hunger strike because the unit was so bad and it was so inhumane that they went on a strike to shut it down, went on multiple strikes, actually. So the SHU, it's talked about in the film, even Naeem talks about they would take you outside and leave you out in the cold, and then bring you back in. Or they would, have this thing where they would put you in a hot cell and you're raging. And then after they put you in a hot cell, then they would put you in a cold cell just to fuck with you. In Westville, it got to the point where someone actually cut off their finger and tried to mail it to the governor, just to bring attention to how terrible the situation was. Eventually, Westville gets shut down because the film talks about it as really a bad bargain, but it was seen as mistreating mentally ill people specifically, so that institution was shut down and just made a kind of mental prison, a mentally ill prison, and no longer like a supermax. But then they just got transferred to what's called the SHU, and that's just another form of solitary confinement, and that's where a lot of this abuse occurred as well. While this is happening, and Naeem talks about how, I don't know the specific years of these things happened, what I'm about to say, but he talked about, being beaten up in his cell, and then left with his wounds to heal. People snapping his kneecaps and all of these things of that nature. This is the kind of things they endured, for, again, decades. So yeah, this is a bit of a breakdown of just how, and that's just a little bit. I could say more, but that's just how inhumane this situation was. I mean, Balogun talks about the water being poisoned to the point I remember he told me is I could have went on strike longer, but the water kept making me sick. You know, and if you drunk milk, that's considered food, so that's not considered a strike. Like that's because it's got protein in it.
Oh man, that's yeah. Well, it's consistent. I do wonder, you know, in the context of Black August and a lot of discussion around political prisoners, when cases like this come up to any level of recognition, are we supposed to care about their initial convictions? And then how does this blend into how we do or should define political prisoner?
Their initial convictions, like what got them in prison?
Like what got them into prison in the first place?
Yeah, this has been highly debated, and we're also working on another paper, a lot of stuff to write at BAP to try to work through some of these positions, because I actually think that we should update the category of political prisoner, or at least return back to some of the writings that some of our elders have already put out that maybe we've forgotten about, because there's other categories. We just did a PE session in BAP about this, I think last month. But to answer the question more directly, I think even those who might have varying definitions still generally define a political prisoner can be someone who can be, you know, politicized on the outside, as in the outside of prison, and then be targeted by the state and put in prison because of their political stance or views on the outside, and then put in prison. Or you can also be someone who went to prison as what, you know, many of the New Africans will call a social prisoner, and, you know, you're still a captive, like you're still part of a colonial or colonized people, but you didn't make a conscious decision to fight against the state or anything of that nature. You could have robbed somebody, or could have been anything as terrible as murder. It could have been anything, or it could be something petty or something, you know, extreme. Like in Naeem's case, he was just there for petty theft. I think both of them were there for some version of petty theft, but Naeem wasn't even there for a violent version of petty theft. The only reason he was even in this prison was because he had a military record. So they put him in they put him in the maximum security prison, even though he really shouldn't have been there in the first place. But you could become politicized in prison, and this is what Lincoln Love, the prisoner who was targeted, did for them, and did for others inside the prison. And then your political conscience can lead you to then take a stand against the guards and against the broader state inside prison. And then the state will hit you with a charge that's clearly related to your political activity. Because like we said, when we just look at their case by itself, they didn't do anything that constitutes a life sentence. Like nobody would say, if they had simply gotten a fight with other prisoners in the same way, if they had stabbed somebody in self-defense, they wouldn't have gotten life. You know, they wouldn't have got a de facto life sentence. So this is clearly, you know, to send a message to the rest of the population that you better not do this, or this is what's going to become of you, right? This is what will happen to you. So that's why we say it's political, because it's not simply about within the confines of what is considered a crime anyway. Now, like we say, you know, all of these things are political, even being sent to prison for petty theft or anything. But there's a difference between like just being caught up in the kind of general sweep of, you know, capitalism and white supremacy versus like taking a conscious stand against it. So the political prisoner category is a part of that is to help people understand the act from the state's perspective, why they tack on such a heavy sentence or tack on a certain level of repression. But it's also to help distinguish so we can in some way respect the prisoners who make those conscious decisions to still go up against that, even when they know that could be the consequence of it. That's how I understand it, at least.
No, right on. I agree. I mean, yeah. and I do think we need to expand the definition, because there's going to be new forms, new generations of political prisoners who aren't going to necessarily be coming out of these traditional struggles.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
especially if you look in the context of what's happening right now with people who are simply participating in their First Amendment rights being dragged off and put in jail for saying the thing the government doesn't want you to say out loud. So I think that's an important thing I think that's important work to start looking at, looking at this definition and expanding it.
Yeah, and I think
no, go ahead.
No,
go ahead. No, not ask my question. No, it's good.
I think yeah, we had to think about. I think Glenn Ford, I think, once said to me in an interview, he said Martin Luther King was a political prisoner, and I never really thought about it, because he was saying, like, even when you're just snatched up for a weekend for protesting, you're a political prisoner. So I mean, we could, like, if you take that definition, you could say that those kids that got arrested on campuses for protesting against genocide, they're not long-term political prisoners. Obviously, they get out of jail within a few days or within a few hours. But he said even Martin Luther King and people within the same movement could be considered that, for a short time, and then you have the ones who receive the harsher penalties. So that's just another definition that's been thrown out there. So I just want to put that out for people to think about it in that sense, because you're always being targeted, and in this world, consider, as opposed to back in the day when there's way more jails and prisons than there were in the 60s and 70s. Like there are literally just way more beds and cells to be filled than there were back then. So the goal used to be to overcapacitate some of these jails, especially in the South. You would send these mass people down to the South, get a bunch of people arrested. You could overcapacitate a jail. It's harder to overcapacitate jails today because there's so many more jails and prisons.
Yeah, they were like, go ahead. We'll just keep building more and bigger ones.
So it's a different beast, but just thinking about, that's why I think part of the definition needs to be updated, because those conditions that we're often referring to are different than they are today. And then I think even the definition of saying someone is in prison because they rose up against the state, or they took a hard line, against the state, or, if that's not defined a little bit more clearly, some people can make a case that someone like Donald Trump is a political prisoner, right? If he was ever actually convicted, but if he was actually ever given any real time, or
his people claim it, that's part of the campaign. They're attacking him.
January 6th or something. And then it's also outside of the confines of the United States, if the right-wing party in Venezuela if people within that party are put in prison, are they political prisoners in the way that we understand, the Pendleton 2, or the way we understand George Jackson? Because they actually are rising up against the state. They actually are, fighting against what's considered the quote-unquote status quo. Right, but we understand that is a different government than it is in the United States context. So would those people be political prisoners, even if they're likely funded by the State Department, the CIA, and we can look at all kinds of coups around the world that were led by the United States, and we have to ask ourselves: are those people who were, part of these color revolutions and such? Are those people political prisoners in the same sense we understand the Panthers, because they quote unquote rose up against the state? So that's what I'm saying. There's a way we have to, and I'm not saying there has been work done on this. I just think sometimes we have to refer back to it. I don't want to act like this is just some conception I came up with. There's been, when you read those New African POW journals, they've really worked through a lot of this stuff. This is a lot of stuff Ori was working through. They really worked through a lot of these ideas. But yeah, I don't think it's the same. It's kind of like when we talk about abolition, sometimes there's challenges there, because again, the reference Ori's work, I can't remember the person that said it. He was like, I think he said, I don't believe in abolition because motherfuckers like Nixon should be in prison, right? So you run into a situation sometimes, you think about the character of what that state is and the character of that nation. Is it the same? Is it all the same as the United States? No. So a political prisoner is not necessarily going to be the same all across the board, right? Because I think if a revolutionary government is in office, despite whatever flaws it may exist, it's clearly not the same thing as the United States and their administration, regardless of Republican or Democrat.
With the whole Assange And shout out, glad he's getting relatively his due. But I started thinking that there's a lot of subjectivity in this, and people start judging the value of a political prisoner based on whether or not they would commit a similar crime.
Yeah.
And it's like a lot of people can see themselves. Yeah, I might do what Assange was. I can see me doing something like that, but I don't see me doing what George or Mumia or Asada, Sophia.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not doing all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't count. So I'm just gonna focus on the other one.
They didn't just leak documents,
right? Or So yeah. I ultimately I just agree. I think it needs to be revisited. Bring back some of the former discussion and update some things.
And there also needs to be room for the fact that a lot of people don't really understand how insidious this system is. So like the student from CCNY who got picked up at an encampment may have a whole different future ahead of them with regard to the system than the student that got picked up at Columbia, right? And depending on who the student is, where they were, what the situation was, there could be all kinds of future ramifications that come from that one night that started out as just one night, but turned into a whole series of things that have a devastating impact on their future. And then schools are also using those arrests as a reason to negatively impact that student's ability to continue their education, to get their degrees, to do the thing on campus based on, this event where they got scooped up with 100 other people because they were saying we don't want genocide. So there's so much more. There's just so much to this whole system and how it relates to just absolutely destroying people intentionally, because it works to remove people from the population, and it works to set up these systems where capitalism can thrive based on criminalizing and incarcerating people.
And I'm glad you mentioned the encampments. Can I show you something real quick? Something real quick, because I haven't even read it yet. I haven't seen the headline right as we were getting ready to get started here. But on the headline at the Chronicle of Higher Education says campus protests are coming back. Students and administrators are digging in. And I was just like, wow, that just read to me as somewhat ominous in the sense that, particularly in context of this conversation, some of these students could end up being the next wave of political prisoners, and so on and so forth. And this digging in, it's like it suggests, conflict.
And it's true, because they're digging in from both sides. Like the students who didn't think genocide was okay didn't go home for the summer and like change their mind, right? They're going to come back with that same mindset. And I, in talking to various students on different campuses, I know their plan was, we gotta go home because it's summertime, but we're coming back the same people in August. And if the school hasn't changed their plan with regard to their support of Israel and how this whole thing works, then they still have a battle on their hands. And the schools are digging in because they're not trying to have this conversation, right? They're not trying to give in to these students for the most part. I think it's only been like one or two schools that have even taken the step of like saying, okay, we'll consider divesting, right? I think only one has actually decided to divest. For the most part, the schools are perfectly content to sit back and collect their money and continue to pretend like a genocide isn't happening. So I do think that's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out as people return to campuses. We're like 2 weeks out from school and classes starting and all them things. And it's going to be
Monday for me.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. I think because I don't know, that Palestine opens up a lot of different things because we're also, since we're talking about political prisoners, we're also thinking about the many people who are political prisoners right now in Gaza or in the West Bank, right, who would just be swept up. And then the students who are looking to defend them, are obviously being swept up, not nearly to that severity, and it's important to make that distinction. But it is occurring. But I think the category is important to understand the distinctions, I think, of your enemy. But I don't think, not to say we're doing that, but just maybe for people listening, it's not so much about getting caught up in what is and what's not a political prisoner for the sake of the definition. It's more so to understand the response of the state and how they are going to treat certain activity versus others, right? So if you cross a certain lines, and even when it's not directly related to prison, even though we're talking about these students where people have lost actual classification of being a student, they've been kicked off campus. Some of them have been deported. Some of them have been, and in some cases, there's even been violence against them. Right. So it's by either cops or Zionist reactionaries or, just vigilantes. But it's just a line that if you hit up against certain lines that are red lines for the state, within this context, the United States, there will be a response. Right. So Israel is a red line. They crossed that red line by, even just having an encampment, let alone doing anything else. This is a red line for folks. This is what gets channels demonetized. This is the kind of, this is a red line. So it's more so understanding what those pressure points are, and not because we're trying to run from those pressure points, but to figure out how can we better strategize a means of pressuring those points and leveraging things against them. With the Pendleton too, it's okay, this is the state has kind of showed their hand. How do you use this case to heighten these contradictions? That's what we think about from an organizing standpoint. How do we heighten these contradictions? Not just say, oh, this is sad or this is terrible, or but it's no, okay, they kind of show their hand that, oh, this is a vulnerable thing for them. That's why they respond this way. This is a vulnerable spot for the state. That's why you get 142 years, or that's why you get suspended from school, right? So we have to figure out ways to actually puncture that, not run from it or whatever, and I think sometimes a liberal understanding of these things doesn't really clarify that these are actually, they're telling on themselves. So you have to figure out how do you utilize that against them, not just simply point out the hypocrisy, but how do you use that against them to actually weaken the enemy?
So, and then you and I'm sure the chat knows, but the president, somewhat to your, as I'm understanding your point, the president of Colombia just stepped down.
Mm-hmm.
So even after she promised to be more aggressive against the protesters than those who got removed from what was it, Harvard and
Columbia?
No, not Columbia.
UPenn.
No, not UPenn. The first wave.
Yeah.
In other words,
you're talking about the presidents. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The Colombia president took a stance that they didn't take and seemed to survive initially, and then just the other day stepped down. So I was thinking, and then in terms of also the Chronicle headline, and then also what you were all just talking about here, they're doubling and tripling down on we're not having it. And even if it's almost like if you can't stop protests from occurring and encampments from occurring, we're going to try to get rid of you. Never mind whether you take an aggressive or supportive stance. So, and then of course, Israel and its defenders have continued to contribute by not ending the genocide. So it's let's round two. It is.
Right. And there's a whole bill, I just read an article that the ACLU is trying to get people to pay attention to, that the state Senate is about to put forward in California. And it looks like Pennsylvania is trying to kind of follow behind to really make this type of protest illegal and to force the hand of colleges to respond to students who are protesting something that, you know, the state doesn't want them to be protesting, and they're talking about removing funding and like if a school decides to divest from Israel and you're a public institution, you're going to lose your state funding for making that decision. So yeah, there's a whole series of things, and I guess I should have probably did the run sheet. My bad.
So in other words, state funding is connected to support for Israel overtly. Is what they're
right?
is
Because
what
if you're getting state funding and the state decides that it is illegal for you to protest against Israel because it's anti-Semitic, and then you allow your students to do that, or you as an institution agree to divest from Israel, that will become a thing that will lose your funding. It is wild how far this whole thing has has gone.
There was another bill that I think that was on the federal side, but they were trying to connect. They were going to use this to strip organizations of their 501c3 status if they supported. I can't remember the specifics because I didn't prep for that, but yeah, they would. There's a means of stripping people of their 501c3 status. I mean, even when we look at cops, the Stop Cop City again, you know, domestic terrorism. You know, like that's for people that were standing around at a concert and they're getting charged as domestic terrorists. Like now, you know, hopefully that gets thrown out because even some of the lawyers on that case thought it was on the prosecutor side thought it was too far. But you know, that's the kind of stuff, or they're eliminating bail funds down there, right? They're trying, and they didn't do something as extreme up here, but you saw this attack in like 21, like when this backlash against defund the police and stuff began, and one of the things they went for was bail funds, right? And they tried to either ban them, or reduce their capacity to exist. You know, so there became this scandal in Indianapolis about somebody that got out because they had bail reform, and some so-called violent guy got out and committed crimes, and he wouldn't have been out in the streets if it wasn't for that, because the cops are against bail reform because they're so lazy that they often will just lock somebody up on nothing and send them to jail for a few days, right? So without having any real case or doing any real work. So, you know, yeah, this is from Palestine to Cop City to Pendleton to, like, you know, this is what they do. You know, this is how they get down, and they're not gonna stop until we respond. You know, like this is why we uplift these stories. Not we want to get them out of prison, but it's also, if we don't take a hard line, like these things will encroach even further. If you're just gonna be just outraged, like, oh, this is so sad. Like, no, you have to push back. You know, and I think some of that is working. You know, like Dr. Wall said, I mean, she had to resign anyway. So, you know, I mean, I'll take small victories sometimes. It's like, you know, for all the horror that has occurred, you know, Israel's economy is in shambles. You know, there are some positive things that have occurred despite the atrocities that people have had to endure. You know, like, you know, so it's like, because they know once the scope is really put on these things, even I know this definitely with Pendleton too. You know, the prosecutor Cummings, who's currently the head prosecutor in Madison County and does not want to review this case right now at all. You know, he knows if we actually got into the deeds of what's going on, not just back in '85, but even today inside these prisons, like, it's not going to make any of them look good, right? And it's not about shame in the sense that they can be shamed morally, but if they feel like their jobs are threatened or their interests or status is threatened, they're going to respond aggressively. But that aggressive response also lets you know who they are and what you're dealing with, and that opens up an opportunity.
Right.
So I see you want to. I got the link.
Yeah, just because I found it real quick. So since I brought it up,
as students return to school, a proposed law targets campus protests. The ACLU is ringing the alarm bell over SB 1287, which the group believes will chill free speech on California campuses, by Jonah Valdez. Just the first paragraph, at least. The bill making its way through California's legislature would stifle free speech on public university and college campuses, specifically around protests against Israel's war in Gaza and occupation of Palestine, according to civil rights advocates. Wow. So this is just specific to California. Or is anybody else?
No, they start talking about California, but they bring up Pennsylvania in this article and talk about how Pennsylvania is next in line and looking at this. And it's actually when they're discussing Pennsylvania that they start talking about pulling funding. And as we know, Shapiro is the governor. so it's all wrapped up, in this framework of you're not allowed to say.
So do they clarify? I'm sure they clarify and clearly delineate the difference between, hey, can we just get some peace in the world, to we hate Jews? Like, do they like, or is it like, I'm sure they delineate.
Why would they do that?
Well, because this is good, it's a good U.S. government. Like everybody, you know what I'm saying?
Man, listen. But this is what we do. This is what we do here. So, but it brings me back to even, back to what happened at Pendleton. Is there any evidence that in the background of all of this, the initial going after Love was actually about the Black Dragons and his pursuit of political education for other prisoners, and that attempt to organize within the prison? Was there anything that kind of pointed out that, because that was my assumption, right? That he's someone who is prominent within the facility for actually trying to educate and revolutionize and teach self-defense and everything that was happening with the Black Dragons. Is there anything that kind of specifically points to that being the reason that they came after him to begin with?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anything directly on that. I think what's interesting about, especially on the local level, about those kind of things is like our language is different than their language. What I mean by that is like they will say that in a way, but not the way you just said it, because they view this entirely different than we do. So we would say, oh, they were targeted because they were, teaching prisoners and organizing and all that, but they'll say that they're a troublemaker. Like that's how they'll label them, right? They'll say that, he fights with other guards, right? When that interpretation can actually be taken as he defends himself and he defends others against guards. So like, again, this is why I really do appreciate Ori's work, because he makes that distinction too. Like when you read their documents, the way they talk about these things is not always accurate, because they don't even know what they're looking at, because they don't understand, the will of anyone other than what they want. So they see things as an opposition, as in this is an enemy of the state, etc., versus the prisoners themselves will see these as positive things. So they won't say, oh, he was organizing Black people and raising their consciousness. Now, when you read some of the higher end documents, like when you see in COINTELPRO, they might have the sophistication to label it that way, but even then they have a very negative view. So when you read like that deposition I was talking about Michael Richardson, you get a sense that they didn't like Lincoln Love. Even Michael Richardson didn't seem to be a big fan of Lincoln Love. But that perception of a prisoner who stands up for folks is not usually seen as a positive force by the guards. Now, sometimes, if it's maybe somebody who, like, you'll have an imam or somebody that's a bit more peaceful and they're able to kind of just calm both sides. Like sometimes the guards might like them, and that's not a knock on those folks. It's just they have a different approach. But if you're someone who's more confrontational, the state doesn't really label you well, so you're never going to see them admit that this person does anything good. They're just not going to do that. They're going to say, he's a problem, blah 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 blah. So you can read in between the lines and get that sense. And then when you compare that to what someone like Naeem says, he said that's the person that gave him the Malcolm X documentary. That's the person that, not documentary, the Malcolm X autobiography. That's the person that, as he said, helped rehabilitate him, that listened to him, that heard him out. Like they do that for each other, but the state is not gonna. They're not gonna see it that way, because to them, these guys are enemies. This is a war, and they're on the other side of the line.
Right. And did the involvement in these activities come up at all during the trial that followed for Balagoon night? Was that part of the conversation in their prosecution, that they were involved in this, quote unquote gang, which would be how they would put it, in the prison? Like, was that part of was that part of the prosecution at all, or was it just simply they did this thing and therefore they got to spend more time?
That was I think it was a small part of the prosecution, but it was also like that wasn't even newspaper articles. Like, that's how some of the documentation of Black Dragons has actually been known. I actually just recently found out, again, in this paper that we're working on, it's not done, that the Black Dragons is actually part of the Black Gorilla family. Coming out of and then the dragon is an ode to George Jackson, right? The Red Dragon. So like that they're actually a part of that. And this is something we had done some civil rights. We were going to file a civil rights complaint. We did some interviews, and one of my colleagues on the committee was reading through the transcripts, and they found that it was actually even one of the founders of the Black Dragons was actually BLA. So there is a real tie to the broader movement, right? Which is what we're trying to display. Now the guards, again, they don't know, especially in Indiana, these motherfuckers don't know much. So it's like they don't know what they're looking at. So they describe them as a criminal organization. There's a big newspaper article that came out around the time. They describe it as a criminal organization because they found some blueprints, they claim, in Balagoon's cell. And I remember actually asked Balagoon about this, and he was like, we had not even fully formalized what we were going to do. So they found some drafts, and they took the worst drafts and they published those and said they ran numbers and they had prostitutes and all of this stuff, even though the goal was to not do those things. It was actually to help people go home and become productive for their own communities. But, this is the kind of stuff that the state runs with. And these are the kind of
That's
things.
Even worse.
Yeah.
Send people home as productive and not just,
not just
open sex work.
Yeah. Right. So, that's just an assault on life for them to actually send people home to be useful. Because, that's the thing I also learned from this is there is a way that they all will be critical of how they came in. We did have a colonial mentality. We did have to transform that. That's what's interesting is they actually find their own way of rehabilitating outside of the state, because they recognize that they in some cases they did either do something wrong, or they were lost, and they were misled, and there is a type of transformation that they have to take on, so it's also there really is a deep appreciation for it, because they're not always just like pointing the finger. They're also like, there's something that we needed to change in ourselves. And that's what they were trying to do with these things. It's not always perfect. Just like any group, you have people that betray the kind of origins of things, but that's how they see it. They had to transform the colonial mentality. They had to get some of those things up out of them that they learned by living under by living in the belly of the beast.
Yeah, my brief time doing the classes in up the road here, Jessup, many of them took it more seriously than a lot of my students at Morgan, and because of that reason, they said I was a predator in my community, and I want to change that. And I'm sure, I could never be sure why, but in most cases I took them at their word and was, that it wasn't just some attempt to rehabilitate in the eyes so they get out. Honestly, I'm not mad at that either, but there was, I think, a genuine sentiment among many that, look, I was a problem and I don't want to be that anymore. And in the process of learning what made me a problem, I realized, no, because there is a set of broader structures here, however folks end up defining it, that they could look, and start to become critical of. So yeah, right on. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So one of the things you mentioned was the role that like the local media and the radio station played in the negotiation piece and trying to, and actually walking them back to their cell, like that whole process. And you've come on so we could have this conversation about media and its role in how all of these things work. So I'm just curious, like right now, is there any role, like, is there a local paper? Is there anything that's still following the story? I know you said that, people kind of, I don't want to misquote you, maybe something like it's forgotten about, like it's in the past and people have kind of moved on from the storyline. Is there any sense that there are people locally that are still paying attention to what, like where they are? Are you getting any support? Like what kind of role what kind of role is the media currently playing in this situation, if any at all?
Yeah, thanks for that. Real quick, I know people come in and out of streams. I just want to say, if you're still on here and you may not make it to the end, please go down to the show notes and donate to the case. I just want to say that it's easy to remember that when we're live, but I just want to say, like, donate. So that link is in the show notes. But to answer the question on media, other than, and I don't mean this to brag for our committee, this is just facts, other than what we've been able to get out there, and there's been no coverage. I haven't heard of anything since I've been involved in the committee, and that's been over 2 years now. I haven't heard any coverage that didn't require them to call us. And usually that's because we reached out or we did something to prompt a story. But there hasn't been any independent investigation. We get trolls sometimes. Like, we just got some hate mail the other day. Somebody that was saying they believed Balagoon and Naeem should have been shot on that day. We just got some of that, and said that our campaign is racially motivated, in a hateful sense or whatever. I mean, and that we're playing the victim card. We get trolls and hate mail from people. We have people, whatever leftovers that are still alive from 85, sometimes will track us down and share their opinion. But there's not been any media that covers these kind of things. I mean, that was part of my frustration with all of this, has been, the way that this gets neglected within general media. And then, if I'm being totally honest, even sometimes not within maybe our channel, but within the broader space, because I think I understand why people, this is not a knock on any of the other cases, but I understand why people want to talk about Mumia and those kind of cases. And it's not to pit one against each other, but I think sometimes we kind of stop in a certain era and then we don't look at what continued to happen afterwards, or places that are not maybe as known to be revolutionary, like in Indiana. Like, no one knows anything about Indiana other than Klans or whatever. That's the stereotype. Those kind of cases aren't considered popular because they don't come out of this kind of golden era of revolutionaries within the United States. So, there's a way that it doesn't get picked up even in those spaces sometimes because it doesn't fit those narratives, even though, like I just named, there were people who were a part of all these, like the Black Dragons comes out of that legacy, but it's not necessarily seen as it's not necessarily seen as a positive, or seen as something that's tied to it. So no, it hasn't really been any coverage. I hope, that changes. Black media, as we know, is not in this shape. It wasn't in a great shape in 85, but it's definitely not in any better shape today. So it's no reason to expect that that things will improve. But that's not really our problem. We have to continue to move forward. But there hasn't been any. I think there was one story on Naeem back in a Black newspaper in 2013. It didn't really get into the general revolt, but it did talk about his case because he's got a life sentence basically. And then but no, I mean, even when you look back through the newspaper articles, like when I was making the film, you find a heavy amount of articles in 85 and 87 when there was a trial. And then after that, it kind of fades away. And then maybe if something comes up with their case, something else I did not mention was in 2019, I think, Naeem's case was vacated in 2018. The judge actually vacated his case. And then he was resentenced in early 2019 to 122 years. That kind of stuff is in the newspaper. And then you have the judge saying the guards expect us to have their back. That kind of stuff is in the newspaper, like whenever their cases come up. But any kind of like investigation or whatever, because there's so much more that we don't even know. Like we have that deposition of the Klan. There's so much more. There was supposedly an FBI investigation into that, but we can't find it, right? We filed a FOIA request for it. So much more we don't know. So I'll start rambling on that, but no, I'm trying to be nice, but the media has not been, you know.
Don't be nice. No, don't be nice. This is my argument all the time with this stuff. Like,
I mean, and shout out to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, because I know you and I and others were both part of that the symposium. I forgot what the broader on the state of journalism and activist journalism and how we, you know, all might find ways to, but it's a very difficult landscape. And the more I'm learning about these digital media spaces, the more I'm, confirmed that things are getting worse to that end in many ways. You mentioned him earlier from when Glenn Ford was talking about the dissolution of Black radio news and the erasure of locally based independent journalists associated with Black media outlets, all the way to today, where YouTube, for instance, the most popular of these spaces, can very easily marginalize and punish people and discourage even the attempts we're making here at collective work. It's no easy. Well, you just outlined. It's no easy task to overcome. So, and then to the extent that there's bandwidth in anybody's media space for political prisoners, you're absolutely right. It's very limited in terms of the those that they'll focus on or give time to. So. Yeah.
And since I'm still not, when I say being nice, I'm just trying not to name names. I know y'all hate me for that, but I'm saying the even the Black again, I'm not gonna name names, but even some of the there are exceptions like FD who posted the documentary on his page. I want to give him credit for that. Who mentioned the Pendleton tool and a video that has over 1 million views. I do want to give FD Signifier credit, but more broadly speaking, people who call themselves abolitionists, people who call themselves, progressive movement lawyers, whatever, they don't really talk about political prisoners. They don't, and if they do, it's just going to be Mumia or something that's become kind of safe. And safe is relative. Obviously, it's not, Mumia is not a safe thing, but it's like popular enough where if you mention him, your career isn't probably going to be on the line in the same way that, now there was a time where that's how it was. But if you mention him, it's become popular enough where within like a kind of liberal left spaces, you could say that, and it's not really that big of a deal. And you can kind of attach yourself to the more popular political prisoners. And again, I mean popular in the sense of our imagination, not that they're popular like high school or something. But beyond that, like, a lot of these places, a lot of these scholars that, make their money off of being the Black radical in a liberal room, they don't really lift up these cases very often. And if they do, again, it's usually one or two, but more broadly, they don't lift up these cases. I think some of that is unintentional, to be a little, not to not be too harsh. And I think some of that is intentional, depending on who we're talking about. And I remember my OG once told me way back, he was saying, he said, if you get into prisons, he's like, the one thing you don't have to deal with is as many grifters and all that, because there's no money in it. Like if you organize around prisons, you're not going to have to deal with as many stooges because there's just not as many opportunities. There's still money, there's still stooges, but it's not as lucrative as, defending other types of social justice. It just doesn't, because it's a hard thing. You are often doing very small things. You see no movement. Person stays in prison. You're trying to find lawyers. You're trying to raise money. And most of that is not going to be on camera. Most of that's not going to give you a good speech or a big rally. It's just not. And so people who are opportunists, people who are more career interested in boosting themselves, they are going to, they're going to do things that are, that bring them that are within line of whatever's already kind of popular. And that's just what it is. And that's again, the reason I don't call out names because for me, it's not about one individual. I mean, there are people I like and don't like, but that's my own thing. But it's more so just more broadly understanding the way that, you know, trends work and the way systems work, and that people are generally going to be attracted to that, you know, as a consequence of the things that could happen to them or the things that they feel are safe, right? So, yeah, you don't get a lot of interest in this, and prisons have become cool to talk about in the sense of like abolition in a generic sense, or it's become cool to talk about you know, non-violent drug offenders, which I fucking hate that term, because non-violent and violent don't really, those distinctions don't even hold up in any real sense. You know, if I get convicted of selling weed tomorrow, doesn't mean I've never beat somebody's ass. You know what I'm saying? Or vice versa. Like if I got convicted of something violent, doesn't mean I've not done something. So that category doesn't really hold up. And I do appreciate the more serious abolitionists for like clarifying those things. But I'm just saying, like, it's become cool to talk about mass incarceration and stuff around the edges, and, you know, and a lot of people even distort some of that. But political prisoners, despite the explosion in conversations about criminal justice reform and all that, they don't get talked about. If you go like something like the Innocence projects and the you know, the Brian Stevensons, I will name one person. You know, I appreciate the work that they do to get people off, but often when we do these when we do a screening or something, people will bring up those entities. And I'm like, those entities, I respect the work that they do. So I'm not anybody that gets out of prison is good, but they don't touch generally political prisoners. They don't touch violent offenders.
That's a good point. Yeah,
they tend to touch like someone who DNA proves was not there, and that does not mean that that's always perfect. I actually have an episode later today about Marcellus Khalifa Williams on Black Myths, who's on death row. DNA proved he did not do the situation. He's still been on death row for 24 years, and he'll be executed next month if they don't figure something out in this upcoming review. So
wait. I know this. Wait. My bad, but I can't. You got to give the quick. How does that work? How does DNA prove you're not there and they still work around? What's the claim around that?
I would say, to get the more details, listen to that episode. But
obviously, but you know, like,
quickly,
you're right. Okay, fair enough. You're right. Don't say nothing. We'll watch the episode.
Okay. I mean, I want people, but some people may. But actually, this episode, well, I gotta remember.
I'm like, don't forget, this is coming on Saturday.
Yeah, this is on Saturday. So actually, when people
we will have already seen it. Right? Yeah, right. My bad. Right.
When people watch it, they will have already seen it. So yeah, it's coming on. You will have already seen it if you're watching. I forgot, but
so don't say it. So if you missed the show, you gotta go back.
Go back and watch it then. But
right, but if you watch Remix, the remixers also saw ML talking about this in the morning, because essentially the short story is they're not even letting the DNA proof come back into the court. That's the short story. So there's no consideration of the fact that the DNA doesn't match, because they're not even. Yeah,
it was denied. Yeah, it was denied originally in the first place. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't want to like belittle anybody's case, because it's all hard. But I'm saying that's how hard it is. Where that case is, it is hard to get someone who wasn't even there off death row. You know, so imagine what happens when it's someone in self-defense or somebody who is a political charge of some form. How much harder
they just don't have the DNA. They
don't have a smoking gun that will like say, all right, you clearly weren't here. So even in that case, it's hard. So imagine how much harder it is for political prisoners. So no, I don't think it's discussed. So again, I don't want to get into bashing, because I don't think that's the point. I would more so encourage people to, you know, highlight these cases, because again, for me, I was once a victim of what I'm talking about, not intentionally. That's why I said some of this is intentionally, some of it's not. Like, I knew about Mumia, and, you know, I knew about H. Rap Brown. I knew about all the or the veteran Panthers and the revolutionaries, but I didn't know about two men down the street, 40 minutes from where I was born, or 20 minutes from where I was born, really. You know, I didn't know that they were locked up. So it's like, there's probably cases locally that are not maybe as big, that don't have as much attention, that, you know, you can find out about. right, that are not going to maybe make you a Pulitzer Prize winner or anything, but there are things that, you know, and you're much more able to be available and helpful to those political prisoners locally than you might be able to be to somebody that already has a defense committee or whatever, right? Like that's, so I encourage people to actually go do that, right? Like I don't want us to not do that. I'm just saying right now that's a problem, and that's a broader problem, I think, of just kind of disregarding revolutionaries who actually put their life on the line in general, but then still want to pose like that's you, but you're not ever going to do what they did. So since you're not, the best you can do, as I always say, is at least defend the people who are willing to do the things that you consistently condone and are scared to do. At least defend the people who have the balls to do it, you know.
I agree. Just quickly, even with Mumia's case, in terms of the popularity piece, you know, even the other day, you know, my man Todd had to, and Dr. Jennifer Black and them had to remind me that a lot of the popularity around his case was actually around the death penalty as opposed to his being a political prisoner.
True.
And it was much easier to get worldwide support against the death penalty case than it would be specific around a political prisoner. And I really forgot all about that. So just to add one more layer to the uphill nature. And I would, if I had a budget, if I had like a real budget, I would absolutely want to hire a video maker to do something like that would compare the time spent by media outlets covering Assange, who again, I think should never have gone through all of that and should be out. I'm supportive of all of that, but who have not put up any time towards any of these other political prisoners. I would be, I guess, petty enough that I would want to see that, just to be like, because that has always been a pet peeve of mine throughout whatever my involvement in any of these politics. It's a frustration that it's like, wow, okay. So like Chelsea Manning, like you didn't know there was political prisoners before her? Like, yeah.
And even like, to your point about Mumia, that still is more about freedom of speech. Like the way you said Mumia is more about the death penalty. That's still
freedom of speech and all that.
Freedom of speech, liberty, because you know that's more of what brings people in. Because I think at the core there is this sense that if you don't do something within the kind of legal confines, like people, we've kind of reached the point on this so-called left, folks don't really know how to deal with that. Like, because everything's been pushed to like either expanding the law so you can legally do things, or you know, trying to prove that when someone did something, it's within the law, or even when someone's convicted of something that was considered wrong, you try to say that they've changed or this is a good person. You appeal to a certain kind of innocent sensibility, even if they committed the crime. So folks that just say we are not going to, we do not care what the law is, we want our freedom the way we're going to get it, that has become hard for people on the left to even deal with or articulate, because the movement has moved away from those kind of tactics. So people don't know how to just straight up say this is right or wrong, regardless of what the law says. It's like, no, this has to always be argued in relationship to the law. So you're always reifying the law and all of that. And I get it, because when you're advocating, you're trying to get someone out, sometimes that's what you got to do. But that's just become more broadly how we talk about stuff. So when we talk about the BLA or the Black Panthers, were not always considerate of what the law, you know, was when something was required to get done. You know, like people who defend themselves and always consider that. The Pendleton too do maintain that it was a self-defense case and that they were acting within the law. I do want to say that, but I'm just saying that is still the way we've been taught to conceive of things, as opposed to even if they weren't acting within the law, you know, even though they were, like, it's like someone was being beaten by the guards, but we're always the ones that got to prove that we were acting within the law, that we were doing things the right way. They never have to prove that. And instead of pointing out that contradiction, you know, we constantly try to do that. So with Julian Assange, it assuages that kind of, you know, that kind of sensibility where he was acting, he was a patriot, you know, or something. Like it's all that kind of shit, as opposed to just being like, fuck the United States and just fuck all of this and we can do better than this. Like that position is never really it's not approached by liberals, particularly white liberals, and even white liberals of color. It's not really, you know, something that
oh damn,
you know,
not white liberals of color. I can't.
I was way late on that. That took a whole repetition in my head to catch up to that. I was like, wait a minute, white liberal.
And I came off mute to say, I was waiting to say something else. Y'all caught me. You caught me with that one. You caught me with that one.
I don't want to take credit, but I saw that on Twitter once, but I put it in my lexicon. I don't remember who said it, but I like that term.
Well, whoever said it.
Now listen.
That's bars. It's bars. That's
and
hilarious.
At its core, I think one of the big things that I think really people need to understand is like they saved the life, right? Like at the core of this entire story, someone would have died if they didn't do what they did. And you know, like that, I think sometimes often, you know, like it doesn't get like really stated enough. Like, let's remember, like at the core of this entire thing, someone was going to die and their actions prevented that death from happening. And in any other situation, if you stop someone from dying, it's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
right.
And I appreciate you bringing that
Not
up.
if it's a lynching, Renee. You can't interrupt a good lynching.
You stop.
Well, I mean, that's what it was. I mean, in effect, I mean, you know, with this whole Klan connection, especially, I mean, they're even saying, you know, it's like another reminder: don't you dare interfere with the you know, don't interfere with the mechanism of whiteness. You know what I mean? With the, you know, just let it keep going. So
right, but I do appreciate you saying that, Renee, because it's like even though like what I just said is, people want to go outside the confines of the law. It's again, all of this stuff, even come back when we're talking about political prisoners and the terms, all of this stuff is a means to like what the actual goals are. So people aren't breaking the law. Revolutionaries are not breaking the law, whatever that even means, just to break the law or just to be violent or just to be thuggish or just to be militant or whatever. No, like you said, they're trying to save a human life. That's the goal of all of this, is to actually make human life better. Like that's the point at the end of the day. We don't actually, if the law worked and it actually improved our lives, then we would follow it. If America was what people say it is and it was this great nation and it actually cared, then we wouldn't have no beef. We wouldn't even need revolutionaries because it's all good, right? But like it does not do that. So these people are trying to achieve the things that the state, I don't even say fails to achieve, because I think it's on purpose, but they're doing the things that the state claims they want to do. It's like, no, we'll rehabilitate each other. We'll intervene to save each other when you're about to kill one of us. You know, we'll go to bat for each other. We'll be our soldiers. We'll be our veterans. We'll be our doctors. We'll do those things for each other because we're all we got. And we have to build that for ourselves, right? That's the self-determination of it all. They're not doing this stuff just to sound hard or just to do whatever. And I think that's part of my, you know, Dr. Ball's talking about his frustrations. One of my frustrations is why all of this gets dismissed, or part of why it gets dismissed, is because there's not an appreciation for the sophistication of these people. They're just seen as just raging, you know, men who might have had a point, but they can't control themselves and they should have tried it this way. It's like, no, they did these things with very logical, calculated, you know, they were clear on why they did what they did. They saw no other way, and I think they're correct, right? I don't think they're out of bounds or whatever. Put yourself in that situation, and you're either gonna let that happen because you're trying to get out. And I didn't also know there's all these little details. Naeem only had 3 months left, right? So Naeem really could have just said, all right, whatever. You know, Balagoon only had about 3 years left. They could have went home. They ain't have to do this. You know, but there was something deeper that compelled them to do it. So that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, the people the revolutionaries who do these things, they shouldn't be romanticized. They're still people. They're still fallible. They still make mistakes, but they do these things with just as much sophistication as you do to go become a lawyer, or as you do to go become a doctor or whatever. They're doing things with, I would say, even more sophistication than people who want to take the safe route. They have valid reasons that deserve consideration. Even if you disagree, those reasons deserve real consideration. They should not be dismissed as simply just, lunatics that that got mad one day. And that is just so frequently happens. That's why I write about rage and stuff, because I think there's a sophistication that rage can bring about. And there's a certain love. There is a love behind that. They loved Lincoln Love. You listen to the documentary, you hear that, like, they're like, how can I say you're my brother and let you die? Like, it's a very simple equation. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not. So it's like, we don't appreciate that kind of a sentiment enough. And I think that's part of why these stories are left out.
So people got to support by clicking the link in the show description, because to something Black you said earlier, especially if you know in your heart that in the same situation you would not have done what these two did. You just said, I'm gonna go ahead, and then you really got to put in a couple of dollars to support people doing what you wouldn't do, but you should have been done. And if you know in your heart of heart that you would do it, then on just GP, then out of like you did what I would do. You got to give. So everybody everybody has to get into that link and support. And I've been thinking about it a lot especially since you sent me that script, and again with the Rochelle McGee piece too. A lot lately I've been, what do you think, honestly, Jared, in your quiet moments, what do you think you would have done? And I don't know, honestly, I don't know, because I could see me snapping for something far less. But I could see, man, I'm about to get out. I don't know this cat who just broke in. Who's the 17-year-old with the guns busting into my hearing? Man, I don't know this dude.
There's a lot to consider. And, I try my best to be honest with myself. And I tell people all the time in like conversations about the things that I involve myself in and whatever, like organizing stuff I do. I know my limitation, right? Like, I spent one night behind bars and I never want to go back, right? Like, one night was enough for me to know that's not like I can't. But I also know that if that's where I end up because I'm trying to do the right thing, like, I'll figure it out, right? Like, you have to figure it out. That's not my intention, right? Like, I'm not going to go into any situation with people go into sometimes these things like, I know I'm gonna get locked up and I'm gonna go anyway. Like, I don't know if I'd really make that decision, right? Like, I'm not really in a place where I feel comfortable saying I'm willing to put my freedom and my life on the line for whatever thing, right? But I think people are not honest about that sometimes. And
I agree.
Yeah, like, it's okay to be clear about that, but to also be clear that you're willing to still say the thing that needs to be said and to be honest about the thing that you need to be honest about. And I think that's where people fail so much, just in general, right? Like, they're so, and I do it sometimes too. Like, we're so busy trying to make sure that we don't cross this imaginary line that's going to like put us in a situation where we don't really want to be, that we kind of forget, like, humanity can't survive if people forget to be human, right? If people forget that other people are human, if people forget that, like, every life should be taken into consideration, right? So, like, I had a conversation yesterday about genocide, and the person was trying to convince me that, like, Trump's genocide would be worse. And my head nearly exploded, because I was like, I don't even understand how we're having this conversation right now, where there's any contemplation that there's a version of genocide that's acceptable. Like, there is no version of genocide that's acceptable. And as we keep falling down this path of this conversation of what's going to happen if this person, like, and we're all, and people just forget, like, it's already happening, right? Like, we cannot in any way, shape, or form pretend like there's a version in future life here where death to a group of people for just being people is acceptable. like that there's a line that we're supposed to, like this imaginary line that we're supposed to cross before it's too much genocide. Like I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, I don't. That's a whole nother episode. But the myth that you can more genocide. Basically, I don't know what that even means.
But that's not what they're really saying. That's what I've just recently figured out for myself, probably late. They're not really saying I'm voting for Biden because Trump's genocide is worse. They're saying I'm voting for Biden because I don't care about the genocide and my life will get worse under Trump.
Harris.
Yeah, or Harris. Sorry, Harris. Right. Sorry.
Yeah,
right.
it's yeah. I'm currently writing something on that too, like on the that false choice or whatever. And some of the discourse I've seen online about we got to hold on to our rights over black people got to hold on to our rights over here, and the Palestinians got to go. They just got to go. Like that really cold, immoral, approach to things.
Wild.
It's wild. It's just not and I don't think that's an accident that's a discourse right now. But yeah, I guess more broadly the way that we talk about, like you said, Renee, like everybody's not willing to go as far as they did, and I think in any war there's different levels of how far people are willing to go. I think if you go to war, you understand that it could come to you one day, but some people are doctors in war, some people some people are inside the center running the weapons, and some people are actually literally out there on the front lines. Like it depends on what your capabilities are. But I always say if they could do this, if they could go out, talking about the Pendleton too, if they could make this sacrifice, the least I could do is do an interview or edit a video, And I think so that's my thing with a lot of folks. It's like, at least push yourself to your own limitations, right? So if your limitations don't go as far as theirs, it is what it is. Maybe you get there one day, maybe you don't. I think we should always push our limitations, but at least push yourself to your own limitations. Like, at least push the institutions that we're up against to their own limitations to see how far we can take this, as opposed to just being like, well, man, I don't know, what I can do. Because when we're talking to people on the streets, sometimes like I realize we've even had to change some of our tactics on the organizing side. You tell people all this information and they're just so overwhelmed. They don't feel like anything can be done. So we have to signal to them that, no, this can change. Like things are not static. Things can be transformed. Right. But, what can you contribute? And I think a lot of people can contribute more than a petition or more than a donation, but we'll take those things too. We'll take whatever you can contribute, right? Like if you can offer your platform, all these things help move the ball to some extent forward. But there's just people who that obviously they're scared, and I get that, and they're worried, but I think at the end of the day, we have to respect the people who are willing to put their lives on the line. Like we need those people. Like, so even if you're not that person, you need those people to exist. You need someone who's, quote unquote, crazy enough to go up against the state. You need the people who will fight. You need those people to, like you said, for humanity to advance. We need those people. For Black people to survive, we need those people. So we can't we can't abandon those people, because those people are essential to our own survival. We can't abandon those people. Those people are important. So I don't think we always have to uplift those people, right? We always have to defend them. And I think because they're precious, to our own survival.
Yeah. Jared, if you don't mind pulling up this workshop link that I just put up. So and I've talked about this before, I've been working with a group that's doing these monthly meetings, and we kind of tackle different issues surrounding the carceral state and policing and all these things. And we decided for August that we were going to actually change up everything that we did and just do a full in-person event and get a larger space and try to bring more people in and talk about Black August in general and get people to understand, not just the history of it, but why it's still relevant and why it's still necessary to follow this process of trying to understand what this system really is and what the baseline of the system really is. And so we're gonna do this in person There'll be a virtual, and Two Black, you might get a note from me, because now after we've had this conversation, I may see if you can come on and jump on Zoom.
I think I have an event actually next week.
Okay.
But I can always send another committee member.
So I just, the goal really is to educate and to give information. And we have someone from the Returning Citizens group out of New Jersey who's going to come and be on the panel. We're still trying to work out some of the details, but I did want to post this for folks who are in New Jersey and people who are interested, to have this information. If people want to join us virtually, or if they in Jersey and want to come in person, this is the next step, the thing that we're doing for August. Again, we're replacing our general monthly meeting, and we're just going to do this larger workshop and focus completely on Black August and the history and the relevance of continuing this work now. So I just wanted to bring that up real quick before we ended, so that I didn't forget to post it. But what we'll do, and I'm sure the planning committee will agree, is we'll do a separate give to the Pendleton too. So we'll set something up so that folks who join, if they're willing and are able, can donate directly to the campaign. They won't yell at me for volunteering the meeting to do that. So we'll do that.
No, I appreciate that. Definitely.
All right, right on. All right, good people. Just enough time to hydrate and stretch before warrior class. And any last things we want to please just quickly, by the way, all the changes on the platform that are happening, the new website, the Remix morning show channel, all of these things, the Patreon, please continue to support. Get into the links in the show description for that as well. And the new website, shout out to Renee and Dr. Mingo and others working on it. You can find all the latest shows, including Black Myths with Two Black and Company. And keeping it moving here. Anything else from either of you?
Just want to thank Two Black for your time. I always appreciate talking to you and having you come on. We need to circle back though about this write-up and this history with the Black Dragons and how it all links back. And I'm interested. I want more. I want more. So we'll have to circle back to that.
When we're done, we'll definitely done and get it published. We'll definitely come back on that. I have a backlog of writing I need to do. I'm gonna try to knock out some of it this weekend. But yeah, for sure. I'm always learning more myself, even being, right at the center of all of this, as far as being on the committee, still learning more. So yeah, I want to encourage people to donate. Encourage any lawyers to reach out. I actually have one to call when I get off here. So that's where my head's been down. So I apologize, but yeah, appreciate y'all for having me on, giving us this opportunity. All of this is helpful. Like I said, it's outside of our channel. There's not a lot of spaces to do this. There's a few. So, and if those spaces that I, indirectly criticize still want to talk about this, I'm down to talk about this, but
there's always a time to rectify your previous errors, dear sisters and brothers.
Yeah.
All right, Jerry.
Thanks for the work, Two Black. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. We'll catch you next week, same time, same place, with more Saturday with Renee.